Okay, what is a good lens? Um, the first thing you have to consider about buying a lens, you are always told that if you have money, invest it on optics. Buy lenses instead of cameras. Because we still use a lens, a very good lens that belongs for 50 years ago. We still use them. They are still usable. But a camera that is 5-year-old is not usable. So investing on a very good lens worth. Um, so the first thing we consider is how sharp is the lens. How can I figure out what is the sharpness of the lens I'm going to buy? There are a couple of sites that they do test lenses, like DxOMark. I love this website because they just benchmark and test all the lenses daily. So imagine that you have seen a very good, you want to buy a lens. I ask you, why do you want to buy this lens? You say that it's very expensive. It should be good. So like a Nikkor 18.5. So you just want to buy this lens because it's expensive, and then you just check. You have to just come here and check the sharpness. It's pretty bad. It's not a sharp lens, so it's better to avoid that. So the first thing we consider is the sharpness, and then the aperture. The wider the aperture of the lens, the better. So how to read a lens? When you look at the lens, this lens is a zoom lens that in widest field of view it is 17 millimeter, and in the closest, in the narrowest field of view it's 35 millimeter. And this 2.8 is the widest aperture. So you can simply read lenses. So this lens has a changing aperture. So when it is wide, the aperture, when it is wide, the widest aperture is 3.5. When it is in zoom, in 55 millimeters, the aperture, the widest possible aperture is 5.6. So if you find a lens like Voigtlander, well, this lens, the widest possible aperture for this lens is about 1. It's 0.95. It's kind of impossible. It's even sharper than the human eye. Well, they figured out how to make it. So the widest aperture, if it is if it is so wide and it is closer to 1, that's a very good lens. Some lenses have in-lens stabilizer. It is the same thing that you see in the in-camera stabilizer. They should be very well sealed, especially zoom lenses. When you zoom in or zoom out, they suck a lot of air inside. So if there would be vapor or dust in the air and they suck it in, then your lens will start to not work properly. And chromatic aberration. What is chromatic aberration? Some lenses, because of the build quality, they cannot converge the whole white spectrum on one point. So they start to work like a prism. So they separate the red and the blue, so they are not formed in the focal point. Here you can see that, especially in these areas, you can see that the red and the blue, there's an offset between them. So there's a spill in red and blue on those areas. So it means that the lens was not good enough to converge all the colors in one point. So there's a chromatic aberration on that. Again, in the same website, DxOMark, you can see the chromatic aberration measurement of any lens. Vignetting. Some lenses, they are great in the middle, but not good in the corners. This is called vignetting, lens vignetting. Vignette. So the less, the better. Lens distortion. So if you want to buy or rent a wide-angle lens, it should have the minimum amount of distortion. You see that the vertical lines close to the sides of the image, they are distorted. Okay, movie camera accessories. Let's talk about that later on. What's the whole point of all these? We have a camera that this camera has aperture and shutter speed and a sensor. You have to play with these to have a correct exposure. So the aperture, the closer the aperture, what I mean by closer, the smaller this hole, the larger the depth of field. What is the depth of field? Those parts of the image that are in focus. So here you can see that if the aperture would be closed, that tiny hole would be very closed, then most of the image is in focus. But if it would be too wide, then just a shallow part of the image would be in focus. This is called shallow depth of field. So depending on your needs, sometimes you need that your actor would be in focus and the background would be out of focus. Then you have to adjust for a wide aperture. Human eye has an aperture between 5.6 to 8. Shutter speed. If the shutter opens and closes very quickly, the faster, the sharper the image will be. So here you see that on the right picture, the shutter speed is 1/4 of the second. So in 1/4 of the second, it has been opened and closed. So that's why you don't see the details of the water moving very sharply. But on the right side, you can see that the shutter speed is 1/2000th of the second. So that's why you see all the details in the water droplets and stuff. So you see all of them. That's because the shutter has been opened and closed very fast, very quickly. So if you increase the shutter speed, you have a much sharper image. But you need to have a very sensitive sensor. You need to have lots of light. But sometimes you don't need. You deliberately want a lower shutter speed because you want to give a sense of motion. So motion blur, you can see that these horses, the moving parts has a blur on it, and the ground, there's a sense of motion in all of them. That's called motion blur. For motion blur, you have to lower the shutter speed. Okay, for higher shutter speed, for closer, if the aperture would be closed to a tiny hole, if the shutter speed would be very fast, you need lots of light or a sensitivity in your sensor. Sometimes you push the boundaries of your sensor and to a more sensitivity. So that's the higher ISO. If you increase the ISO, then you are introducing noise and grain to your picture. So it's like a balance. You always have to balance between all these three: ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. And the funny thing is, at the end is the cell phone cinematography. Your cell phones in your pockets, they are getting insane. They are getting more advanced. They have higher resolutions, but lots of cell phones that you have in your hand can record 4K movies. They have higher frame rates. The iPhone can record 240 frames per second. Well, just 5 years ago, if you want to record such a high frame rate slow motion movie, you have to hire a $8,000 camera. The color depth is better. You can edit on cell phone. You can have pro lenses for your cell phone. Have you heard of Schneider lens? Schneider is a company that makes just very high quality lenses for cinema, and those are very expensive lenses. The same company has made lenses for iPhone, and it's just funny. So they made some lenses for iPhone, and it's much cheaper. You can buy a complete set of Schneider lenses for iPhone for like $300. So pro lenses are getting introduced for the smartphones, and you have in-camera stabilization in your smartphone. They have face tracking. You can control the exposure, and they have sharp screens. As I have told you at the beginning of the class, the movie Tangerine, it is shot on iPhone, and the iPhone cinematography is no more of a joke. It's happening out there. By installing just a simple piece of app on your iPhone, Filmic Pro. Filmic Pro is an app that when you install it, your iPhone, it pushes the boundaries of your iPhone, and then you can now control the exposure, the aperture, the shutter speed. You can control the ISO. You can control and also it records on a very high quality movie. So if in automatic mode your iPhone would be able to record, let's say, 8 hours, now it can record 30 minutes, but with a very high quality movie. If you just check the website Filmic Pro, it's a $5 piece of app, but it's worth a lot. In gear, you can see that people are buying different professional audio solutions for iPhone, or they are buying different lenses. Or different stabilizers. And the good thing about smartphone cinematography is that things are quite cheap. So a gimbal, do you know what is a gimbal? Okay, a gimbal like movie M10. Look at this. This is a piece of gear based on gyro effect and GPS. It removes your extra movement. So shooting with a gimbal like movie M10, it's very smooth. So for a shot like this, look at this shot. Just 5 years ago, for shooting this shot, you have to borrow long rails and a panther and 4 people just pulling or pushing this panther. But now you can smoothly shoot this shot using a gimbal like movie 10. But this gimbal for heavy cameras will cost you like $10,000. But the same gimbal for where is it? For an iPhone will cost you like $600 or $300. This one is $300. So things are much more accessible, much more affordable. So these are the websites that I check every day. So DxOMark, I told you. I check this website for seeing the benchmarks and testing of different lenses and different cameras. So lenses, or so I just check different sharpness of different lenses and the camera capabilities. If you are going to shoot some landscapes and you're looking for a camera that would be awesome for landscapes, so you can find the camera inside your budget. I check Deep Preview every day. Deep Preview is the latest technology news, reviews and news in camera technology. So let's say this camera has been introduced few days ago. So there's a complete review of the camera, the features. I go read through all of these. I just enjoy reviewing the technology and just finding. If you keep an eye on the technology, at the beginning of the class I told you, you can make brilliant movies with very cheap and low cost budget if you have an eye on new upcoming technologies. You have to know what you need, and then you just have a look at the technology. And also the website No Film School. This is a very cool website. There are lots of reviews about movies, about screenwriting, about the new cameras, new festivals, visual effects, animations, and stuff. Okay, great.